And we're live.
Good afternoon, everybody. We'll now begin our regular council meeting of the Township of Cavan-Monaghan on this Monday, December 21st. I'd ask for approval of today's agenda. Got a motion from Councillor Belch and a motion and second from Deputy Mayor Graham. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Huntley.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes.
Councillor Moore.
Yes.
Councillor Belch. Councillor Belch.
Where'd he go?
It's frozen at the North Pole.
Frozen? Is he still here?
Yeah, I can see him.
There. Okay, Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. I'd ask that any members of council declare any pecuniary interest and a general
Can't hear me
thereof at this time or when the situation arises. And Councillor Belch is back. We can hear you.
Yeah. Okay.
Very good. Agenda is approved. I'm now asking for disclosure of any pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof at this time or when the situation arises. Seeing none, there is no closed session, so we will move right into presentations. And our first presentation, item 6.1, Nick McDonald, RPP, Meridian Planning, regulating cannabis in the Township of Cavan-Monaghan. Welcome, Mr. McDonald. Are you there?
Mr. Mayor, you have the ability to promote him to speak.
All right, Mr. McDonald, I will allow to talk. Mr. McDonald, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
All right, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you for having me this afternoon. So I guess I'll just jump right into the presentation. Not sure if there was any overview being presented by Mr. Connolly beforehand, but I'll wait a moment if there is.
No overview. I just in terms of as a presentation, again, Nick McDonald from Meridian Planning will be giving the presentation, and then we have a report later on the agenda. Hope that's a good enough introduction.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Just wasn't sure. I do so many council meetings. Every one of them's a little different. Anyways, my name is Nick McDonald. I'm a registered professional planner, and I was retained by the Township of Cavan-Monaghan to review cannabis related issues and what other municipalities are doing and identify a number of options for the township to consider moving forward. If you can advance a slide, please. So I prepared a background report dated December 14th, which I understand is on your agenda. And the report's quite lengthy. There's a lot of information in there, and I'm happy to answer any questions on any part of it. But the report essentially reviews and assesses recent federal legislation on cannabis cultivation and processing and the impacts on land use planning, and also identifies, as mentioned, options for regulating the activity in the township going forward. Next slide. So in terms of the federal act and the legislation itself, the act and the regulation that implemented it came into effect on October 17th of 2018. And of course, as many of you are aware, one of the goals of the act is to provide for the oversight and licensing of a legal cannabis supply chain and establish the basis for the issuance of licenses that will set parameters for the operation of a legal cannabis industry. The regulation itself, which implemented the act, established a number of different license types, with those licenses and the granting of them being the responsibility of the federal government. There is no requirement for confirmation of zoning before a license can be issued. However, the land use is, in my opinion, subject to official plans and zoning bylaws. And this is exactly what a number of municipalities throughout Ontario and across Canada have been doing in the last couple of years. Next slide. So in terms of provincial policy, we've determined that the cultivation of cannabis is an agricultural use, much like any other crop that is grown and then cultivated, and therefore permitted wherever agricultural uses are permitted. The processing of cannabis, i.e. putting it in packages, storing it, getting it ready for sale, and so on, could also be considered an agriculture-related use. under certain conditions, and that is a use obviously related to agriculture. And those 4 conditions are as follows: has to be directly related to farm operations in the area, has to support agriculture, benefits from being in close proximity to farm operations, and provides direct products and or services to farm operations as a primary activity. Next slide. Land use considerations. There are quite a few based on my work and the work I've done for a number of municipalities. And it really comes down to scale and location in terms of the impacts these kinds of operations can have on adjacent land uses. And some of the impacts that have been identified and noted in other communities include odor, which have been noticed up to 2 kilometers away, depending on prevailing winds, depending on the number and nature of uses that are located downwind from these facilities. Light impacts as a result of the specific lighting used in these types of greenhouses. The 2 pictures on this slide are from the Leamington area. These were not taken by me, but by someone else. And he was at a Timmy's at 6 o'clock in the morning when he took these pictures. And the purple light is from greenhouses that are growing cannabis, and the yellow light is from greenhouses growing vegetables, most notably tomatoes, which is what Leamington is known for. Traffic impacts as well. Usually in agricultural areas, you don't see much traffic unless people are driving to and fro from nearby urban areas. But some of the larger cannabis greenhouses can employ 300, 400, or even 500 people. And that certainly has an impact on rural roads in the area. And of course, water and wastewater impacts. These buildings can be very large. And certainly there could be impacts on water supply. Where does the water come from? And certainly from the disposal point of view as well. Next slide. In my experience, the most significant impact resulting from this kind of use is from odor. And I've learned a lot about this recently as a result of my work for the town of Pelham, which is in the region of Niagara. And I've come up with this list of what I call variables that have an impact on the degree of impact that odor may have on adjacent land uses, most notably residential. And the first one is whether the facility is a greenhouse or an industrial type building. And if it's a greenhouse, whether the greenhouse is purpose-built for cannabis or industrial hemp or already exists. And this has to do with how the greenhouse is constructed. In the newer greenhouses, much like newer warehouses and industrial uses, you have much higher ceilings, and you're better able to deal with the odor impacts that result that occur as a result. If someone buys a greenhouse that was used for some other purpose, the potential for, remedying odor impacts is much less. Size and scale of proposed use obviously has an impact. Some of the facilities I was dealing with in Pelham were over 300,000 square feet in size. That's obviously significant. Not all facilities are that size, but with the concentration of, growers occurring across Canada, we are seeing larger size facilities being developed. Of course, the proximity and number of sensitive uses in the area, with sensitive uses being residential primarily, including the potential for additional sensitive uses on vacant lots that are zoned to permit a sensitive use is also a consideration. So obviously, if a greenhouse is going in an area where there's a lot of residential development on severed lots or in some small subdivisions or near a rural settlement area, that certainly has an impact. If such a facility is located in an area where you don't have many houses or other sensitive uses, well, of course, the impacts are much less. Location of proposed use in relation to prevailing winds, and in most of southern Ontario, that's from the northwest. So if you're living downwind from that, you're much more likely to notice the odor from cannabis than if you are living upwind. The nature of the adverse effects that exist at the time in relation to indoor cannabis and industrial hemp cultivation facilities, not really an issue in Cavan Monaghan, but in an area where there are already a number of other greenhouses growing cannabis, then the combined impacts may actually be much worse as a consequence. And of course, the impact of topography on the dispersion of odor. If you've got a flat plane of land, the odor disperses in one way. But if you have a rolling, hummocky type of terrain, the odor can actually sit in these small valleys for quite a period of time, therefore increasing the level of impact. Next slide. So what I've done, based on direction given to me by Mr. Connolly, was to identify a number of options for the township's consideration. And I've come up with 3. So option A is the most restrictive. Option B is generally status quo with some changes, and option C is more permissive. So option A would basically involve developing official plan policies that essentially indicate that the indoor growing of cannabis is not permitted in any designation or zone without going through a zoning bylaw amendment. Just to be clear, no OPA would be required, just a zoning bylaw. And that zoning bylaw amendment requirement would apply in your agricultural and rural area, in your urban industrial area in Millbrook, and in your rural employment areas as well. Site plan approval would be required in all cases, and there would be a need, of course, to comply with setbacks. The rationale for this option is that because of the variables I had just mentioned, it is often very difficult in advance to determine how and where these facilities should be located, and more particularly what the setback should be from these facilities. And of course, the smaller the facility, the lesser the setback, but that's very hard to figure out in advance. And that's really the basis for the option. If we went with this option, the policies in the official plan would indicate what the land use considerations would be to support a rezoning change, and it then would also identify the types of studies that would be needed to support the application as well, with one of those studies being a study that looks at odor impacts in particular. With respect to outdoor cultivation, given that cultivation is an agricultural use, it's very difficult to prohibit the growing of anything outdoors. However, we would recommend that a setback of 300 meters be included within your zoning bylaw, and that's based on the experience of the County of Norfolk, which has a lot of experience with this. The City of Ottawa followed suit, and then I made the same recommendation to the town of Pelham with respect to outdoor cultivation. Next slide. So option B is basically status quo. Currently, cannabis processing or some variation of that is permitted in your zoning bylaw in the M1 zone in Millbrook. And what this option is suggesting is that that status quo be retained, but that we include a new setback for cannabis cultivation in an indoor facility from sensitive uses of 150 meters. I've looked at the Millbrook area on Google. I have not visited it live, but I've been through the area before, and there do not appear to be many sensitive uses in the area. However, I do note that residential development is starting to encroach from the south, and that a new community center has recently been built in that area as well. So those are considerations moving forward. In the agricultural and rural areas and in the rural employment areas, there still would be a requirement for a rezoning and site plan approval if this option was selected. Next slide, please. Option C. So this option is more permissive. I'm not in a position now to recommend this option, but I put this option on the table for discussion and consideration, particularly because you have some very significantly large rural employment areas in your township. They do appear to be zoned M2. There are a few other zones that also apply. These areas are quite large. They are quite vacant. There do not appear to be many sensitive uses in the area. So one of the options to consider would be to allow for cannabis cultivation to occur within these areas, subject to site plan approval, and of course compliance with setbacks. I'm not in a position to make a recommendation that you select option C. There would be a need for some additional analysis in terms of identifying where other sensitive uses may be, and to make that, I guess, final determination. And outdoor cultivation in each of these options would continue to be permitted as a permitted use, and of course subject to the setbacks I had mentioned earlier. None of these recommendations or none of the options I've identified includes as an option the permitting as of right of these types of uses in the agricultural rural area. Based on my experience and given that the agricultural area is the site of residential dwellings that are essentially scattered across the landscape, it's very difficult to pre-zone, in my opinion, for these types of uses with that context. And I think it's much more appropriate to go through a public process, have a public meeting, and get community input before a decision is made in that regard. Next slide. So that was a very brief presentation. These two slides, or these two pictures on this slide, are of existing facilities in the town of Pelham. You can see they are quite large. I'm not sure you'll see facilities of this size in the Peterborough area. However, it is possible. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that you may have at this point. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. Questions from members of council? Deputy Mayor Graham.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Very informative, and also in the subsequent report, I think it's built out in more detail. A point of clarity question that I had was with, and I think you some of the content in what you just verbally provided, I think addressed some of them. One of the concerns that I think a number of our residents in our community would share, especially when you put, structures, let's call it an industrial scale or size facilities like these, is my question with regards to protections for agricultural zone property to be converted to what I would call more of an industrial scale cultivation. Can you maybe elaborate about some of the protections that, or maybe best practices, or how other municipalities have created, obviously with all of the PPS and other legislation that we're bound with from a planning understanding, the protection of agricultural and prime agricultural, specifically lands, is a paramount for our community. And how can we, allow for certain opportunities like this to be considered without, or maybe minimizing, or at least protecting the preservation of prime agricultural lands from being converted into more of an industrial scale development?
That's a really great question, and municipalities have really been grappling with that. So in parts of Southern Ontario where greenhouses are very common, it's less of an issue because that's the form of agriculture that occurs in those areas, most notably Leamington, County of Norfolk, Niagara region. And when you build new greenhouses, they fit into the agricultural character in the area because that's what you typically see. In an area like yours where you don't see too many greenhouses, building a substantial greenhouse type of building will look very different and will look very odd on your landscape. And while you can get at some of the design issues through site plan approval process, you're not going to be able to get around the fact that these are large buildings that are much larger than your typical barn that you see. I guess related to your second question about protecting prime agricultural land, the interesting thing about many greenhouses is that they're located where they're located, not because of the soils, it's because the land is cheaper. And it's much easier and cost effective for them to build in rural areas than it is to build in urban areas. And in many cases, they aren't even using the soils on the property. They're actually growing hydroponically, or they're doing other things. So it's a very good question. But at the end of the day, if somebody came to your township and said they wanted to grow vegetables and build a greenhouse, nobody would have a problem with that. And that's the challenge we have, is that as soon as they convert vegetables to cannabis, oh, that's different. Now we may have a problem because there are impacts as a consequence of that.
Follow-up, Mayor, if I may?
Go ahead.
Yeah, to your point, I'm not sure I necessarily agree with the point that people wouldn't have a concern if prime ag was being converted to a greenhouse or any application. I think the issue being that, the reconverting or recapturing, the production from these facilities versus from the land that, they're otherwise cultivated from, it is a very complicated and, maybe a more common occurrence than I believe it probably is. So, I appreciate your point and I appreciate the comments, but I think that, and as we are just phase one of this process, I'm sure the public will engage and and enlighten us all as to what their opinions are with regards to this. But I think I can speak from the conversations that I've had is that is very clearly throughout the county, especially in our township, a real primary concern, not having the experience with regards to greenhouses in our township. I know it's something that especially from an industrial zoning component, is something that we're very much working towards having more of that sort of vertical farming or greenhouse components be an acceptable use in those areas. So I don't think you're going to get much in the way of pushback from that area. But I was curious if there are specific ZBAs or other sorts of conditions or setbacks that have been present in other municipalities that are addressing sort of that concern. Because I'm sure they're depending on the nature of the framework of things as you've alluded to, they might be familiar with. Has there been examples of restrictions that have been in place or been enacted to protect the conversion to that more industrial sort of scale? That's sort of what I was looking for that I didn't see in the report or in the presentation.
Right, and it's a fair question, and I guess my answer is that some municipalities have attempted to regulate the industrial look of these types of facilities by including lot coverage restrictions in their zoning bylaw, so that only 30% of an agricultural lot can be covered by a building, as an example. Or they require larger setbacks, i.e. 60, 70, even 100 meters away from lot lines. So you're minimizing the impact of that greenhouse from the road in particular. Now, of course, when you start including those setbacks and lot coverages, that begins to require much larger properties for these types of uses by definition. So that's what some communities have tried to do to minimize the impact on the landscape.
Okay. Last one, Mayor, if I may.
Go ahead.
Is with regards to the converting of pre-existing facilities, is that other than the erecting of some of these, taking over or breaking ground on otherwise, productive or potentially productive agricultural land, is there mechanisms by which, to me, I'll just use a very basic example. If there's vacant barns or facilities or farm structures that aren't in functioning production or cultivated use that could be otherwise converted, to me that's sort of the best case scenario, and that you're repurposing an existing building rather than erecting new and taking more acreage away from production. Is there allowances or any sort of suggestions that you could make with regard to that sort of accommodation?
Well, I guess from the perspective of protecting agricultural land, certainly I would more support using existing structures where possible for this type of use. The challenge that I've come to understand is that these existing structures are not necessarily the best types of structures to mitigate odor issues, and that purpose-built greenhouses that are made specifically for this type of crop are actually much better designed and much better able to minimize the adverse effects from odor. So having said that, certainly using existing structures is great. One of the challenges some communities have run into is that if an existing structure is there and somebody just changes their crop from vegetables to cannabis, there is no local approval required, no building permits are needed and that kind of thing. And if there's some doubt about whether you can do that in your zoning bylaw, you'll probably never even know until there's a complaint. But if you include very specific provisions in your zoning bylaw that specifically indicate that the growing of cannabis inside structures is not permitted, then there's a zoning bylaw compliance issue that eventually gets raised and has to be dealt with.
Thank you.
Very good. Further questions from members of council? Councillor Moore.
Yes, through you, Mayor. I'm a little more concerned about the water usage for the greenhouses. I visited a site in the summertime east of here, and they occupied approximately 5 acres. They had to drill a pond. They were pumping 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and they watered every other day in each greenhouse. But they were drawing approximately 7,000 gallons of water a day. And I just wonder, is there anything that should there be testing done around here before any of these greenhouses are set up? Because they were supposed to have 20 greenhouses. They were only using 10 at the time. And that's the water consumption they were using.
And that's an excellent point, and that's one of the other reasons that I feel that there's a need for some type of process before these uses can be established. And as one of the requirements you can set is a hydrogeological study that would be done in advance. If they are taking more than 10,000 liters per day out of the ground, they require a permit to take water from the Ministry of Environment as well. But those processes aren't public. Sometimes you don't even know those permits are being applied for unless you go online and check it out. But going through a public process of requiring a rezoning and then requiring those kinds of studies, and if they're satisfactory, that should allay any concerns that folks have about those kinds of uses being established.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions from members of council? Councillor Belch has disappeared. I'm sure he'll be back, and if he has questions, I'll let him go ahead. But I did have a few. I guess the reason we embarked on this was recognizing the importance of being an agricultural community and how we could, how the cannabis could be become part of the fabric of within the community in order to embrace it. It is federally legal. And there are sets of licensing, there's setbacks, there's smells, there's all of those that are taken care of at the federal level. So I guess my concern is that in going through this, I see in order for it to be embraced on an agricultural property, we're putting them back through a whole zoning process, of which that fundamentally I have an issue with, because that was what we were trying to deal with, recognizing that there's all these other various levels of government that are already have their fingers in on the restrictions related to it. So if it was anything else, i.e. pig farms or chicken farms or vegetable farms or anything else that's legal, we're okay to proceed. But suddenly when it's cannabis, then we're requiring a rezoning, and it's requiring based on setbacks, et cetera. So what is missing from the federal guidelines that we need to capture at the municipal level in order to weigh into this discussion?
That's a very good question, and I thought the same thing at the beginning when the legislation and regulation came out. But then I saw live examples of licenses being issued and considerable impacts as a consequence of those of the issuance of those licenses, particularly in the town of Pelham, and I'm finding in other locations in Southern Ontario as well. In my view, the federal licensing process does not adequately deal with sensitive uses in the area. It does not provide for mandated minimum setbacks. It requires, I guess, air filtration and filtration control with these new facilities, but there isn't a process in place through that licensing process to really deal with complaints moving forward. And to your point, with respect to other types of livestock operations, there is an established process called minimum distance separation guidelines that are in effect. So if someone wants to put in a pig farm, yes, while it is permitted on every property in your agriculture area, it doesn't necessarily mean it'll happen, because if they can't comply with minimum distance separation formula, then they cannot establish the use. So I liken what we're doing, or what I'm recommending with respect to cannabis, is that we're filling a void that the MDS calculations and guidelines do not deal with. And if the federal government, if the provincial government modified the MDS guidelines or came out with different guidelines that did the same thing, then we wouldn't need a zoning bylaw amendment process any longer.
So if I understand you correctly, you just stated that federally, there's no minimum setbacks.
That's
for
correct.
cannabis.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Is Councillor Belch back yet? I see. Okay, he is connected. I don't see his video, and he's muted. So, Councillor Belch, if you do have any questions, you can certainly ask it now. What I will do, Mr. McDonald, is we're going to continue. We'll receive the presentation and move on. However, if you could just hang around, because Mr. Connolly's bringing forward his staff report. And if the question is outside of the scope of his staff report, he may very well refer to you to provide some assistance.
Thank you. Will do.
Okay, very good. All right, with that, I see Councillor Belch, you are back through
Yeah.
audio. Do you have any questions? We are going to deal with Mr. Connolly's report later in the agenda, so you can certainly ask them at that time as well.
Yeah, that's when I'll probably bring up a few things. Sure.
All right, very good. With that, then, can I get a motion then to receive that that presentation? We've got Deputy Mayor Graham, Councillor Huntley. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Moore, Councillor Moore,
Oh, you're muted again. Sorry, Councillor Moore.
Sorry. Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Thank you, Mr. McDonald, and we look forward to you during the presentation or the staff report with Mr. Connolly. Next up is our delegation. Our delegation today is from item 7.1, Isabella Fabili. It's safety concerns regarding construction in the Highlands of Millbrook area. Ms. Fabili, I will remind you, our limit on delegations is 10 minutes. And once you start talking, the floor is yours, and we look forward to hearing from you. So go ahead, Isabella. Isabella, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear
Yep.
you. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was talking. I guess I was muted. Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and Council. Thank you. I did bring this to your attention just via email back in July. And I just due to conflicting a schedule of the time of council meeting and being able to attend. So I'm presenting this now, and I'll keep it brief. I am concerned about some of the safety, the safety that's taking place, and I did send you photographs to help support this, is that where I live here in the Highlands of Millbrook, in the backyard, construction taking place, I have never seen dump trucks, bulldozers. I'm not talking little ones, big ones. And there is no safety fence, no signage whatsoever. And there are families that back onto my property, 4 of them behind mine and my neighbors. And as you can see, with the trampolines and the kids, safety should be at the forefront. And that is a priority. And so my concern is that, that I'm all for well-planned strategic planning, like I stated, but you have to ensure the safety of the residents and the integrity of the lands in the town of the charm. So that, and I even spoke with Severio Montemorano. I had him even in my house, and I said to him, Severio, I've never seen anything like this. And he says, it takes place. I go, where? In Vaughan, in Peel, Mississauga? Nowhere should this be taking place. This is a safety concern. And ultimately, the authority resides with you, council, and the decision-making in the planning department. And I know you might say that, oh, it's a labor issue. I know, I've called people. I've been on the phone with, I've spoken with Ron Lucas. I've spoken with Margaret Linkletter. I've spoken with Brandon Williams. At any rate, that is my concern. And I bring this to touch upon other lands that will be developed by this land developer and builder going forward. And I just want to ensure that safety measures are in place and that they're adhering to it for the safety of our residents, the children in particular. Have you had a chance to see the photographs?
Is that your presentation?
Well, I mean, I know it is very choppy. That's why I sent it to you via email. And that's it. My concern is, as I stated in the email, I don't know if you had a chance to read it as well today, is that ultimately the authority lies with you, and you determine who's developing in these lands. And and that they're adhering to safety measures. Now that's incumbent upon the builder, who in turn reminds their contractors. So I ask for your support in this. I don't have children of my own, but safety underscores everything that I do at work. I'm a school teacher, and I hope you can appreciate that if you have children in particular. Because, okay, I'll say one more point, and the one point being is that when you're dealing with big land developers, they come and they bring a lot of tax base, and I'm not against that. But this has to be balanced. And they also then have a great wealth of say because they're bringing more money to the community. But then we have to remind them who has the ultimate authority. That's all I'm saying. So your support in ensuring that for further development in this town, that safety is taken into consideration while construction is taking place. Thank you.
Okay, very good. We're probably going to have to agree to disagree on this. However, we all have our lanes of jurisdiction to stay within. And as far as safety of a construction site, that jurisdiction falls within the Ministry of Labor. And we can agree to disagree, but at the end of the day, we have no jurisdiction for the safety of the actual construction site. That's what the Ministry of Labor's position is. And so,
and if I may interject, Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead.
You have the decision to determine who develops in this area, whether it's Bromont or Pristine, and Bromont being the land developer. So that is ultimately upon yourself and the council and the building and planning department, who can speak to the company, the land developer, to ensure, because it is incumbent upon them with the contractors that they bring in, whether relatives or not, to ensure that. And I would imagine and hope that your concern is for the safety while this country, this county, this town continues to grow. And hopefully doesn't become urban sprawl in the process and nobody gets hurt.
And again, that's without outside of our jurisdiction as well. Who owns and purchases land within the township, we have absolutely no control over. And we have no control over who those developers are either. Who chooses to develop, they have to go through all of the same processes of which we prescribe to them, but we can't put in place things that we don't have jurisdiction over. So yes, they do own the northern subdivision to move ahead. They do have to comply with all of our rules and regulations, but we can only set the rules and regulations that fall within our jurisdiction. If they're outside of our jurisdiction, we can't enforce them because we're bound by the Municipal Act, and within the Municipal Act is not the labor law. So I understand your concern. It has nothing to do that we don't respect the need for safety, etc. But to ask us to go outside of our jurisdiction, I'm sure you can appreciate we have no ability to do so. So we have no control over who buys land. We have no control over who those developers are that do buy the land. What we do have control over is all of the planning, all of the building code, all of those restrictions we absolutely have control over. Outside of that, it's not up to us. But what I do encourage you to do is to contact the Ministry of Labor and to contact Tarian if you've got specific issue with the actual construction itself. That is the proper authority to deal with it.
Mr. Mayor, I'm really disappointed and find it very disconcerting. And I know we will disagree, but here, this is the point. I've done the whole circular motion. I went through municipality to Tarian, to the safety board, to Ministry of Labor. And I understand what you're saying, but it is the council at the end of the day and the planning and building department who issues the permits, who rezones. And especially in light of this cannabis project that I had no idea, but that's another issue as well. And those are concerns, but I can distinctly get the impression of where, and I appreciate what you're saying. Technically, it's out of your control. But however, we know that the council and you, Mr. Mayor, have that authority and power to determine what is going to be rezoned, what will be designated commercial, residential, etc. And then we have the power to create municipal bylaws. Am I correct?
No.
We don't have the power? Who has the power to create those municipal bylaws that are specific to?
The municipal
Right.
bylaws are within our control. However, to suggest that we can control the amount of development that takes place within our subdivisions and within our community would suggest that we overrule what the provincial policy statement and the growth plan is. So we're designated a certain number of residential dwellings of which we will plan for over the course of the next 30 years, which is all part of the official plan, which is part of our public process. So absolutely, we need to comply with the provincial government and their policies in place. So we can't simply say we're not going to do development and we're not going to do commercial development. We're not going to do anything. We're going to shut the doors. Absolutely, we cannot do that, which my
Well, I don't
understanding
want you to stop
suggesting.
the development. I
But
don't
that's
want
what I'm
you to.
saying. So we have to
You
plan
have the,
for the
but you have the
future.
ability for policy, and you just stated, you have the ability and the control over the policy within the municipality, especially even going back to when you were asking Mr. McDonald, there's no minimum setback federally. So you need to know what the bare minimums are, and that's my concern, but you shared a lot with me, and it's been very enlightening. But I really hope that you understand that you are in a position, and the people who elect you into this position of power are hoping that they have your support in thinking of the well-being of the residents and the growth and future development of this town, keeping safety in mind.
We're going to have to agree to disagree on the responsibilities of the Ministry of Labor and what the responsibilities of your local.
No,
And that's fair.
you know what? You know what, Mr. McFadden, we're going to disagree about that, but don't misdirect the attention, because the issue, the power resides with you. Don't underestimate it in terms of the municipality. Then you know that you can have that influence on the zoning, the bylaws, the permits issued, and to whom they're issued. You cannot control who purchased the land. You're right. And I don't have an issue with economic development. I have an issue with safety and people turning a blind eye to it if they now know, or it's been brought to their attention, even if it's not their direct responsibility to enforce it. They can send a strong, clear message so that land developers and builders are not at the helm of this town. Thank you for your time, Mr. McFadden.
Very good. Thank you very much. Motion to receive that delegation. Councillor Huntley, Deputy Mayor Graham. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Our next item is 8.1, minutes of the regular council meeting held December 7th, 2020. Motion to adopt those minutes.
Tim?
Deputy Mayor Graham and Councillor Moore. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes. Motion is approved. Next item, 8.2, minutes of the special meeting held December 10th, 2020. Deputy Mayor Graham and Councillor Huntley. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Next item is minutes of the Municipal Revitalization and Heritage Advisory Committee meeting held November 19th, 2020. Motion for those minutes. We got Councillor Huntley and Deputy Mayor Graham. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. And finally, the minutes of the Millbrook Valley Trails meeting held November 23rd. A motion for those minutes. We have Councillor
Tim?
Moore, and Councillor Belch. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Our next item is item 10.1, Report Plan 2020-49, Regulating Cannabis in the Township of Cavan-Monaghan. Mr. Conley?
Through your worship to the rest of council, you have before you planning report number 2020-49, regulating cannabis in the township of Cavan-Monaghan. There are two recommendations. The first being that council receives report planning 2020-49 for education discussion purposes. And number two, that council provides direction to the consultant on the identified options for consideration to be presented at a public meeting in January of 2021, and then come back to council with for a final decision in February of 2021.
Good. Questions from members of council? We have the report on the screen, so I can't see everybody. I apologize.
Tim has a question.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Belch.
Through you, Mayor, to Mr. Connolly. have you had any personal discussions on how big of a project they want to make this?
Through your worship to Councillor Belch, which do you mean in terms of which project? Because we've had a number of inquiries, but and we have ideas, and there have been a number of properties, either prospective interest, or we have actual companies that have actually purchased lands within the township, but nothing specific. Again, the reason being that we need to make sure that the official plan and zoning bylaw requirements and site plan controls, they are in place in order to facilitate those discussions.
I suppose this would all come out with regards to my question during a public meeting as to how big this might be. I'm just wondering if they're looking at this as on an industrial scale, like they do down in southwestern Ontario, or is this I don't know, just the gentleman that was making inquiries, I don't know, it felt like it was sort of a mom and pop kind of adventure.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Belch and the rest of the council. I'll certainly, Nick could, Mr. McDonald could certainly provide some background in terms of other jurisdictions he has that expertise and experience, specifically to a number of the conversations within the township. We have proposals that people who are trying to use existing buildings, people who are looking at the idea of, again, maybe erecting buildings on agricultural property to be able to allow that. But in the absence of what I would consider a complete policy landscape, it'd be difficult to be able to say navigating one way or the other. As it stands now, the official plan only allows cannabis cultivation in one particular zone, and what council had asked is that we employ Mr. McDonald and his experience to come back with a suite of options which would be able to tell how big is big, and depending on what that size would be, what would be the requirements, and that's what was before in the presentation.
Good. Councillor Huntley?
I think Deputy Mayor Graham was.
Deputy Mayor Graham?
Thanks, Councillor Huntley, and through you, Mayor. Just a question with regards to maybe a comment, even maybe less of a question. I found that the subsequent report and some of the content and the definitions, cultivation, production, et cetera, there's a myriad of terms that what I used to understand them meaning when it comes to cannabis, they can mean different things and very complicated things. Just a comment with regards to the public meeting. I'm looking forward to the feedback and understanding of the different options presented to them there. But I would just make the suggestion that we potentially, fleece out in a bit more detail and a bit more simpler language the variability between the the three options that are going to be under discussion, just for the general public to really get an understanding. Obviously, I think the most important part that we're going to have to gain from the public consultation and engagement is, specific feedback over specific concerns that we can maybe reflect in legislation or bylaws that we move forward with to not miss out on the opportunities for economic development that this growing industry could provide to us, but at the same time creating a policy that actually reflects and addresses those concerns, some of which we've discussed today. So I just take that as, I understand it's a complicated subject, and especially when it comes to planning, as you know, John, it can get complicated in a hurry. So I just wanted to echo that and then hope that that's taken into consideration for the presentation.
Through you, Chair, to Deputy Mayor Graham. Yes, obviously this is a complicated matter. There are a lot of moving parts, and that's why we brought in Mr. McDonald and his firm as an experience to sort of be able to make this appropriate for what council and what ultimately the community wants to have and what they want to see on the ground. It is complicated. It has a lot of licensing, certainly from the federal level, and the land use planning, which is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, in terms of what's the appropriate setbacks. So we want to make sure that we go forward, but we go forward with the right step, and certainly what council has the appetite for, and that's kind of what this report is for. The options that are there, are those the right ones? Are there options that council wants to explore beyond that, or is this a good start in order to then right size it?
And I think a clarification with regards to the municipal mapping that we've whether it's the employment land strategy that we've just are in the process of completing, You know, that we have mapping that can sort of help inform the public about the opportunities and what zone is what in this process as well, which I think could be a benefit because I'm sure many people don't understand it, having not been exposed to it. So I think with that audio visual component could also be helpful in understanding sort of where the opportunities could be considered and highlight potential issues that might be specific to this township that might not have been you know, consistent with Pelham or other areas.
Through your worship to Deputy Mayor Graham, of course, duly noted.
Very good. Councillor Huntley?
Through you, Chair. I guess my concern is sort of similar to Deputy Mayor Graham's is, you know, this is obviously isn't a trivial subject, and my fear is we'll head down a planning path where we pigeonhole things, we make things so rigid that, you know, nothing fits anymore. So I hope that we can go down a path where we can, you know, start to, you know, kind of right size this and maybe have sliding scales on things. I mean, I've heard, you know, 70-meter setbacks and 300-meter setbacks. You know, and I've heard, you know, operations that have 300 employees and operations that are mom and pop shops. I mean, these things are obviously very different, and I think they need very different approaches on how we handle them. So you know, in terms of trying to simplify this, I think it's complicated, you know, just by the sheer nature of it. But I really hope that, you know, we take into consideration, you know, how we can best accommodate, you know, various sizes of this, if this actually goes ahead in the first place, that is.
So through you, Chair, to Councillor Huntley and the rest of council, I think what I'm hearing is planning will get away from pigeonholing. I think the idea is that it will provide the specificity and be able to have a lot better idea, certainly from a community standpoint and certainly from council, as to where these things would grow. And as Deputy Mayor Graham had indicated, from a mapping perspective, we'd be able to know where within the township you would allow certain uses or where those things were. I think what's being brought forward is the land use planning mechanisms, whether zoning bylaws or the site plan controls, and obviously the setbacks are something that would look at when you get that sliding scale, what would be the appropriate setbacks or controls, whether from a hydrogeological standpoint or from a nose odor land use compatibility issue. That's the kind of thing we want to do. So going from what's there now within the official plan to not opening up the gates fully, that's what we want to do, is be able to right size that. And hopefully the options that the consultant has identified is something that council is comfortable going forward. It's the kind of thing that will solicit public input and get a better idea as to what would be the size and what is the appetite from a township perspective as to what they would like to entertain and how wide open that would be. Again, not to pigeonhole, but make sure the appropriate controls are there from a land use planning perspective.
Deputy Mayor Graham.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a follow-up question, I'm assuming probably for Mr. Connolly, but potentially the consultant as well. As we're all, you know, becoming more and more aware, the announcements are rolling out today that we're heading back into potential lockdown. With the discussion with regards to the public meeting in January, I couldn't help but notice that was a singular. So my question is, with regards to the public consultation and engagement process, what is the actual plan in place, and is there going to be, you know, how open and opportunistic or accessible are we going to approach the engagement with the public as we move forward with obviously a topic that's going to be of interest to a number of residents? Given the COVID restrictions that are coming forward, are we able to make, you know, are we going to do a similar approach, as there'll be a window for input from via email or something, or what public sort of approach are we going to take with this engagement moving forward?
Through you, Chair, to Deputy Mayor Graham and the rest of council, perhaps I'll have Mr. McDonald sort of give an idea of some of the things that have taken place in the last while, what's worked well. Ultimately, what I have done is provided the opportunity, we've engaged Mr. McDonald and his firm with the idea of certainly meeting the minimum requirements, but that's not what we want to do. We want to make sure that any public meeting is meaningful input. So it's a good conversation, and it wouldn't be done just with the idea of just clearing the bar. That's not what we want to do. But certainly open to any opportunities that if you feel we need to go further, we certainly have those challenges with respect to COVID and how we've done that, but we've done that in a number of different ways in the township to be able to solicit that input. But maybe Mr. McDonald, you may have some conversation or some comments on this.
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
great. Thank you very much. That's a very good question. And I guess what Mr. Connolly is asking through this staff report is for a direction to be selected so that it can be presented at a public meeting. If that's the route you're going, i.e. the next step is a public meeting, then there has to be something that gets presented. It can't be 3 options. What do you think? It's a public meeting on an option. What do you think? Now, if you don't want to go to a public meeting right away, but you want to do some type of engagement where you present the 3 options, get feedback, and then decide which option you want to go with, then you could have the public meeting. But when you have a public meeting under the Planning Act, you have to have a proposal. So that means picking one of the 3 options I've identified or coming up with another option. So I think what Mr. Connolly is saying, pick an option today, great if you can, and then a public meeting is held on that option in January. If you're not comfortable picking an option now because you feel you want to think about it, or you want to, I guess, obtain the views of the public in some other way, then some type of public open house could be scheduled, again, virtual, where the same type of presentation would be given a little bit longer to provide a little bit more detail, along with some mapping, and input would be received. And Mr. Connolly would then report back to council on what he's heard, and then you can decide which option you want to go with for the purposes of a public meeting under the Planning Act. So there's a couple of choices there for you to consider.
Very good. Further questions? I know one of my questions, I apologize, Mr. McDonald, I asked specifically about federal setbacks, but I should have meant just upper levels of government setbacks, because there is provincial setbacks, correct?
There are provincial setbacks, but they don't deal specifically with cannabis. The setbacks that are included within provincial documents are minimum distance separation guidelines. For example, there are setbacks that are derived from determining how many animal units you have in a livestock facility and multiplying that by a number of different factors, and so on and so on. There are a series of guidelines established by the Ministry of Environment called the D series guidelines, which also establish suggested setbacks from industrial facilities to sensitive land uses. But it doesn't really apply to circumstances like these because they're agricultural uses and they're not industrial facilities. So I've had quite a bit of experience with this particular issue. I've been to the OMB and LPAT many times over my 30-year career, and the provincial guidelines are just those, they're guidelines. They're not mandatory, they're not mandated, and that's the challenge.
Okay, so that helps. So there appears to be more strict guidelines with regards to maybe the retail end of it in close proximity, just as an example, to schools. So you could technically, you can't sell it next to a school, but you could actually have a whole field of cannabis growing next to the field.
Yes, with one caveat, there is a setback if you're growing your 4 plants in your backyard. It has to be a certain distance as well from certain uses, but we're not talking about those kinds of things in this meeting. We're talking about something much larger than somebody just growing 4 plants in their backyard. But there are no other mandatory required setbacks in any of the legislation that applies to this particular issue. To a very large extent, the federal government rushed to get this out there to fulfill a campaign election promise they made, but they really dumped this issue to the provinces and to the municipalities. They did not do any thinking about how this would impact on other people who live nearby.
Very good. I guess with regards to the recommendations, I know we've talked about it. They're not recommendations, they're simply options. And I think regardless of which you may support or endorse of the options, I think it would be very helpful if that table didn't just include the various requirements, i.e. you're going to have to do a zoning, et cetera, in the different zones. But I think we really need to see the pluses and the minuses for each one to help us better understand, and include 2 more. The first one option would be a do nothing, and these are the pros and the cons of leaving it the way it is. Then you've got your 3 options. But I would also like to see if it's opened right up. Here's what the pros and the cons are. Here's what your issues are. Just it helps provide a more structured way for council to see all of the pros and cons of the various options that we're dealing with, as opposed to legislatively, if you do this, then you require a zoning versus you don't require a zoning for that. I think it's the underlying, what's the implications of that choice, the pros and the cons. And I think that would definitely help me a lot. I don't know how the rest of council feels. Councillor Huntley?
Through you, Chair, I have to agree. I mean, the 3 options to me are written for planners by planners. I mean, for a public meeting, I don't think anybody would be able to interpret or understand the difference between any of them. mean, other than the fact that there's a couple X's missing in a chart. Like, I think they have to be constructed in such a way that they're meaningful to a citizen to understand what are the real,
What are the implications?
what are the real implications of each of these options, and the other options that the mayor has just spelled out as well.
Very good. Is that helpful, Mr. Connolly, in preparation of the next steps?
Certainly it is. I can work with Mr. McDonald and sort of go back, take back again the idea of the options. And the intent was not to say that we wouldn't spell out what are the pros and cons of each approach and what would be the nuances or the specifics behind it. This was being presented from a process perspective of what would be required or not, because that was part of the foundation of the direction given in June or July when this first was brought forward, and exactly what would be the planning requirements there. So either way, that's the kind of thing that we'll go back. I'll work with Mr. McDonald on that, come back with a report. If it's the idea of you want all options to go forward with the idea of getting input and then going to a public meeting, that's something that we can work on and take care of that, if that's exactly what you're looking for.
Okay, Councillor Huntley?
Through you, Chair. Sorry, Mr. Belch. But I don't think we can go to a public meeting when council doesn't really understand what the implications of each of these options are. So I mean, if as Mr. McDonald has alluded to, I mean, you have to have you try to get something out of a public meeting, and if you're only taking one option and nobody really understands what any of the options are, I think we're jumping the gun there. I think you guys got to come back, with a little bit more better explanation of what these options are before we can even select any of them to say, okay, let's present this to the public and see what they think about it.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Huntley, that was my intention, was not to jump straight to a
Mr.
public
Connolly,
meeting.
can I interrupt you for a second there? Can you just
Yes.
have a conversation with the individual over your wall and indicate we can't hardly hear you because there's background noise?
I shall do that. Hold on. That's the difficulty of working in these remote situations. So again, through you, Chair, to Councillor Huntley, the intent was to take the input and the discussion that we've had today. I'll work with Mr. McDonald in terms of how we would bring those things forward and then bring it back in January. Another report which would basically show the 5 options with the idea of honing down on what is the preferred option, but again translate into pros and cons and what does that mean from, as I think you're trying to indicate, from a common sense or on the ground point of view as to how this would be discussed and how others would be able to, outside the planning world, be able to understand. And then we would bring that back to council, and then council would identify a preferred option, and then that would be the basis of how we would get input and then a public meeting.
Thank you.
Very good. Councillor Belch, I can't see you, so I'm asking, do you have any questions?
I do.
Go ahead.
Through you, Mayor, to John. Just wondering if it would help on a bigger picture standpoint to get a sense of where the industry overall is right now. We sort of had this big sort of open the floodgates, and a whole bunch of people applied to run various growing opportunities and stuff. And I just wonder where things sit. It seems like there's an awful lot of consolidation that's been going on by huge companies. And I'm just wondering whether we're going to get in a situation where somebody's come in and just literally want to start things up, but then sell it off to a big conglomerate.
Through Chair, through Councillor Belch, certainly it's something that Mr. McDonald in his background study and the attachment to this report did get into other jurisdictions and best practices. If it's something we need to update, because again, there's more detail that's either absent or we want to specifically do that, we can look at that. But certainly that's something we can bring back in terms of, I know there's a lot of movement in the last little while since Mr. McDonald had produced his report, but we can certainly come back and provide some narrative about that.
Thanks.
Very good. Did we lose? Oh no, Councillor Graham, sir. Any further questions for Mr. Connolly or Mr. McDonald? Okay, then looking for a resolution then. I know there's been discussion, so I would expect that there's going to be a modification to the recommendation to include the addition of a couple more options. We may very well wish, if we're going to change it, we may very wish to provide the flexibility in order to also direct staff to coordinate with legal as well, because there's obviously beyond the planning, there's also the legal component that we probably should run it past legal first. And then I don't know whether council wishes to have it come back to us first before we go to the public, or how we wish to deal with it. So I'm looking for the flavor of council. Anyone? I don't see council. Go ahead, Councillor Huntley.
It's through you, Chair. Like I think as far as the recommendations go, I think we can accept recommendation 1 and receive this report. But the recommendation number 2, I think we should direct the consultant to come back with the options presented, as well as the alternative ones, or sorry, additional ones that you've mentioned, and present back to council. And I don't know whether January makes sense, but potentially January, before we go back to public. So I don't think we're ready to go to a public meeting on this at this point. I think the report needs to come back to council with the alternative options, as well as, you know, a further explanation.
Okay, very good. Ms. Hurley, before I move that as a motion, are you comfortable with that? Essentially, we're asking for two more options, and to come back with an explanation of each of those options as to the implications of each, as opposed to simply the planning lingo of what they each mean, but the actual implications to us as residents of the community. Ms. Hurley, go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, I think we're fine with that. If that's a motion, then Mr. Conley will, along with assistance from Mr. McDonald, will bring a report back, and maybe we'll stretch out some of those options and explanations, and we'll bring back a report in the future before going to the public.
Excellent. Very good. So we got ourselves a motion. Madam Clerk, are you comfortable with that motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I just took out the timelines for January and February and included the wording to include the additional options as discussed, as opposed to the specific detail. I believe between Ms. Hurley and Mr. Conley, they're fairly clear on those.
Yep. All right, a seconder on that. I can see I've got Deputy Mayor Graham. Is that a hand?
Tim?
It is. Okay.
I'll continue with a comment.
Go ahead.
So, sorry, did I hear?
Go ahead.
Okay. My question is with regards to the potential restrictions of the designation of a public meeting versus an open house. I mean, I think we've had very good considerations and very good public input from the open house approach that we've taken on a number of issues, and this would be one that I think maybe we would benefit from, if we are going to move forward, or if there is an appetite for the consultant to move forward with some sort of public engagement, sooner than later. That might potentially, by changing that from an open house to an open house from a public meeting, it might provide the feedback that we're looking for to then be informed enough to engage in a public meeting to actually finalize what we're going to move forward. That's just a comment for consideration, but I defer to the staff and experts when it comes to that.
I think maybe before we get into the details of that, once it comes back to council for further discussion on the 5 options, I think we can work out the details of the public meeting versus open house and the intricacies of how that's going to work. But I think that we could have that conversation at that time.
No problem.
Okay. Councillor Belch, did you have something further?
No, I think that's sorted out.
Very good. Well done, council. I will ask then, Madam Clerk, can you call for recorded vote?
Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes.
Councillor Moore.
Yes.
Councillor Belch.
Yes.
Councillor Huntley.
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Thank you very much, Mr. Conley, for that report, and we look forward to the next one coming back.
Thank you, Worship.
Next item, 10.2, Report Finance 2020-23, Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, COVID-19 Resilience Infrastructure Stream. Ms. Pope, welcome.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to Council, I have this grant application before you. We're actually looking at the municipal office because of the timelines. We do require that the construction begin prior to September and be completed by December 31st. The maximum amount of our grant that we're allowed to apply for is $100,000, and we're looking for that to offset the $400,000 that's already been pre-approved by Council as part of the tender that the CAO brought forward on the municipal office renovations.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Pope. Any questions from members of council? I can see everybody except for Councillor Belch. So Councillor Belch, if you have anything, please just interject.
No.
Okay, seeing none, motion then to receive the report and accept the recommendation. Councillor Moore and Deputy Mayor Graham. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Counselor Belch,
Yes.
Counselor Huntley,
Yes.
Counselor Moore,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Our next report from Ms. Pope, Report Finance 2020-24, 2021 User Fees and Charges Bylaw. Ms. Pope?
This report is brought to you to bring forward the 2021 user fees and charges to be implemented for January 1st. I've highlighted inside the report the various changes or increases and also highlighted on the attached bylaws as well for your consideration today.
Very good. Any questions from members of council? None. Motion then to receive the report and accept the recommendation. Deputy Mayor Graham. Councillor
Tim?
Moore, Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Counselor Moore,
Yes.
Counselor Huntley,
Yes.
Counselor Belch,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Next report, Planning 2020-47, Pristine Homes Part Lot Control Exemption Bylaw, Block 135, Plan 45M-256. We've been through these before. There is no discussion. This is of all exercises, a rubber stamper. We got Deputy Mayor Graham and we got Councillor Huntley. Councillor Tim. We got Councillor Belch on this. Okay, Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Counselor Huntley,
Yes.
Counselor Belch,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Counselor Moore,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Next item is item 10.5, Report Planning 2020-48, Coldbrook Drive Veltri Subdivision Agreement. Miss Ellis, you are going to have to talk about this one.
Thank you, Mayor McFadden. Members of Council, Planning Report 2020-48 is before you today with the following recommendations. Firstly, that Council recognize Coldbrook Drive as the road name for the new street in subdivision application 15T-16001. Secondly, that Council agrees to the transfer of ownership of Block 30 in Plan 15T-16001 for open space, provided that such lands are not part of any parkland dedication by the township, and that bylaw number 2020-76 be approved to authorize the mayor and clerk to sign the subdivision agreement between Veltri and Son Limited and the corporation of the township of Cavan-Monaghan.
Very good. Questions from members of council? Councillor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, to Miss Ellis. Is it common for houses that already have addresses to have their addresses changed to reflect the new street name? Like, I mean, if there's any, home businesses in those addresses, I mean, they're gonna have to go through some substantial expenses potentially to, remarket themselves. Has any of that taken into consideration?
Through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council. I wouldn't say it's common. It has happened in the past, and the township has engaged in other situations where we've had to renumber or rename the street. We looked at it in terms of the way the street pattern is, and we actually looked at whether we could keep the Nina Court name and keep it going to the east, but the way the existing numbers were created, we didn't have an option. So after much review at a technical level, it was felt that this was the best alternative. And that, as indicated in the report, the developer will be responsible for reasonable expenses associated with those 5 existing residences having to change their address.
Very good. Is there a process in place then for being recouped as far as the reasonable expenses, or how does that work?
Mr. Mayor, just to help Karen in this, we have a letter of notification. I'll just put my video on so you can see me. We have a letter of notification that goes to the property owners affected. That does indicate in the letter that we are requiring the address change and that they they can submit receipts for any out-of-pocket expenses, and we will reimburse them for those. So that is a letter that goes to them after we have, of course, finalized the subdivision agreement and proceeded with the name change.
Councillor Huntley?
Through you, Chair, like, are there specific expenses that you are, going to highlight in there? I mean, I honestly, I can't remember, but I thought there was a cost to changing, like, your driver's license and your health card and things like that before they're due. Like, and they could not, like, there might not be a charge associated with those, but are there known charges that you can, list out and say if you experience any of these, or is it just a blanket? If you incur something, we'll consider it.
we've not done that in the past there because typically it's people that may have a home occupation or something like that where they have brochures and things like that. We consider that that would be reasonable to submit an invoice for that. I'm not aware of charges for driver's license and social insurance, et cetera. But if there are, we would consider those to be ones that could be submitted also. We can outline some of them, but we usually leave it open so that they will submit. And if we, we're reasonable on this. I don't know that they should have a lot of out-of-pocket expenses, but whatever they are, we'll look at it. We'll sort of say this is reasonable. So they may have basically business cards, something of that nature, and I think that's a reasonable out-of-pocket expense. So we would allow for that.
Okay.
So a question, so once this name change occurs and everybody changes their house numbers, then what's going to happen with mail that's addressed to the old address? Are they going to be required in order to do a mail forwarding? Because I know that's not inexpensive either. Because without the house numbers, the old house number on it, I can see how that's going to get confusing. Or is it a super mailbox so it's all dealt with internally and they don't have to worry about any mail forwarding?
The mail delivery that presently goes there, I think it's door to door there. There is a super mailbox that is going in the subdivision. And again, it's usually the onus is on the property owner to advise people that are addressing mail to them that there will be certain changes coming forward. So it's not without some work on their part. So this, I don't want to, it's not an unreasonable request. We have had it done in the past, and the mail is one issue that has to be dealt with one way or the other. So they'll have to advise, our businesses, et cetera, that they have a change in mail address.
But I know most people, when they move, they actually apply for that mail forwarding, and I think it's $75 to $100 a year, if I'm correct. So again, that would be what's considered part of those reasonable expenses.
I would say so, yes.
Okay. Any other questions from members of council? I know one of the items that it's come up in general, and I really think staff at some point needs to come back with just a general policy as it relates to development in general, not specific to this subdivision, but just from a high level, with a clear understanding that the municipality will not be on the hook for any part of a new subdivision, that we will assume the subdivision when it's complete, but under no circumstances, I think it needs to be spelled out in some sort of a policy to clearly indicate that the municipality is not responsible for any of the costs it will take to bring on a new subdivision. So I know it's something that we've sort of gone around on, and it seemed to keep coming up, but I think it would really be helpful if we had a clear policy with that in mind. And I'm sure there's other members of council have other items that they would like in a general development policy for review at a future time that's more over and above that. But I think relative to all of the growth and development that we are seeing, I think we've got lessons learned on various parts and different subdivisions that we'd like to see incorporated so that we as council don't have to continue to remember them or carry them forward. So I'm not sure where council sits with that, but that would be my suggestion over and above once we've dealt with this report. Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. Yeah, I agree that, the planning process is a complicated one. And this is, sort of, despite as far as this specific development has gone along, which could seem as a fairly long ways through the consideration and review process, there's still a myriad of different policies and motions of council that needs to be adopted here. So I think, my concern is from an approval standpoint that, when we have these plan of subdivision agreements, I think there's always the concern that we are potentially approving or endorsing things that are, meant to be captured later, but might be omitted from things. And then, unfortunately, in certain instances, the municipality can then have to bear those costs of remediation or correction. And I think it would be nice to see, or a potential for consideration, if there's an opportunity, and if it's obviously legal, for us to have a caveat or an understanding in the plan of subdivision that, that there are other, maybe even a list of policies and other components that need to be fulfilled, and it is the responsibility of the developer to fulfill those requirements or any costs associated with the correction thereof. So anyways, that would just make me sleep a little easier at night, but I understand that there are legal limitations to what we can and cannot do, but I defer to the experts on that.
Very good. And with that, we have video from Ms. Hurley. So I think she wants to say something. Go ahead, Ms. Hurley.
Mr. Chairman, just a question either to Mr. Hancock or Ms. Ellis. Given the conversation that I'm hearing today with regards to the cost of changing the address, have we broached that subject with Mr. Veltry's development to see if they'd be willing to cover that cost?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Ms. Hurley, I haven't personally broached it. It is, I don't want to throw you under the bus, Wayne, but generally the street naming and addressing is a public works issue. I can tell you that the subdivision agreement does contain security deposits, and we do have a subdivision fee that we use to cover our costs, and there are additional costs in this subdivision agreement for additional planning and engineering review.
I think just to follow up on Karen's comments, that I don't see this as being a large number. So, but I did not speak directly to Mr. Veltry on it. I believe it's a clause that we're incorporating in the agreement, and it goes forward as a requirement. I'm not sure there's any questions on that.
So, Mr. Hancock, is it reasonable to say that we could utilize the securities or the administration costs? So therefore, it's not going towards, the taxpayer?
I think we're going to carry it as a clause in the agreement, so the securities are there to safeguard that the municipality doesn't pay. So I think that goes unsaid.
Okay, so my question then, Mr. Hancock, is so the costs are going to be drawn down. We'll be paying for them, but we'll also take those costs out of the securities and not from some other. Yes,
it will be paid for by the development or developer. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think just in regard to the policy, I just a policy that sort of says the developer is responsible for all costs is it's something that can be looked at, but there are some guidelines, there are development charges, there are a few things that are out there that are acts of, as I think Deputy Mayor mentioned, or the Mayor has mentioned, that we will have to take into account. So we can develop certainly a policy that says if there's impacts on things such as local addressing, et cetera, it will be paid for by the development. We can do that. But I think some of the other matters are a little larger than that. That's all.
Yep, very good. I think that's why we're looking for more of a policy coming back from staff so we can take into consideration all of that as opposed to just a simple council motion of all costs go back to the developer. So that's what we'll look forward to that. And I'm sure there will be all kinds of intricacies because, you do have to comply with all the development charges and the additional funds that are coming in for sure. So maybe
Mayor
if I can break it
McFadden?
down, we've got, go ahead, Councillor Belch.
Through you, Mayor McFadden, just one of the comments that I wanted to make is even before I became a councillor, it was kind of well known that developers came into Millbrook, and it was a bit of a how to put this delicately, that it wasn't always in the interests of the township that the various places were built. And often it was basically forced upon the township to pay for a lot of things. And I think we've learned a lot over the years, and just, as a support of developing some guidelines and principles that the Works Department could add in there, that would be great, because nothing worse than having development and you didn't learn from it, as far as some of the pitfalls that we ended up falling into. So just added support.
Very good. Excellent. All right. We've got the recommendation on the floor specific to this application. I suggest we do that, and then we'll bring back an additional motion relative to having staff bring back a policy. Does that work? Can I get a motion then to receive the report and accept the recommendation? We've got Deputy Mayor Graham, Councillor Huntley. Very good. Madam Clerk, record a vote.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is passed. Deputy Mayor Graham, you had some additional items with regards to that policy. I'm going to turn it over to you for that motion. My specific part is with regards to the financial component, that the municipality is not on the hook for any component of the development subject to the rules and regulations that are put upon us. But I know you had something additional to it. And with that, some sort of a policy that's going to come back from staff to council for further communications in the future.
Yeah, and through you, Mayor, I haven't cultivated a specific policy yet, and so maybe I'll ask the clerk to help me. But the idea would be that within the plan of subdivision or subdivision agreement, that there would be the inclusion of a list summarizing the various municipal policies, or even some sort of link to those policies, so that they can be reflected. And the idea is to address any sort of, I think Councillor Belch was alluding to some of those components where, you know, things might slip through the cracks, and then because they weren't caught at certain review instances, like plan of subdivision reviews, that, you know, that then the municipality becomes financially responsible for those things. So I guess the summary report would be that staff look and review the plan of subdivision agreement structure to potentially include a summary of the additional policies and requirements that are to be, or that apply to the specific subdivision in question, for council's peace of mind.
Ms. Hurley? You're muted, Ms. Hurley. Very
Thank
good.
you, Mr. Chair. I didn't even have to raise my hand on that one. I think through you, Mr. Chair, to the Deputy Graham, I think we need to get a handle on what the policy, what we're asking in a policy before we attach or make a recommendation, even legal if you can, with regards to a subdivision agreement. So I'm just sort of backing that up just a little bit, if I may, to say maybe direct staff to look at a policy with regards to
if I can offer a word, it's almost like your baseline policy. In other words, you come into the community, this is your baseline of what is going to have to happen, so that nothing slips through the cracks. So everything from your baseline of the financial, your baseline of the streetlights, you've got a baseline. If it's already covered in a policy, as Deputy Mayor Graham's indicated, then quote the policy where it's at. But my concern is you just have these one-offs that seem to slip through the cracks because they're not caught by anything else, because we don't have a baseline that covers everything.
Yeah. I was even thinking, sorry, through you, Deputy Mayor, I was even thinking of something as simple as an addendum to the existing agreement, that it just summarizes these different policies and whatnot, so that there's no going back on saying, well, you know, that this state of agreement or the subdivision agreement provided or was a missed opportunity for an enforcement or a meeting of a certain criteria, that it wasn't really intended to be captured at the plan of subdivision agreement stage. So.
Ms. Hurley?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, again, I guess my point is I think that we need to have the policy drafted, or what that consideration of that policy would be. There are some items that we would include. There are some items we can't include. So sure. I think if you want staff to sort of develop a checklist of saying you must have or you must include something like that of a policy, then leave that with us. We can draft that up. We can take that under consideration. And then once it's been approved or adopted or agreed upon, then we can take a look about where's the appropriateness of where that would be placed, whether it's a schedule, you know, a schedule to the subdivision agreement or not. I see Ms. Ellis is back on here as well, so she may have something to add to that. But I don't think I want to automatically state we're attaching it when we haven't even developed it or even know what it looks like at this time.
Very good. I think too, if you take a look as a simple example, once you go over a certain number of homes within a subdivision, then you need to do the fiscal impact study. Like that's a very simple case of if you're doing this, you must do that. And the same thing goes with regards to single car garages versus double. I recognize it's now captured in the zoning, but just high level, we don't need to have that conversation again because we've dealt with it. So it's one that can be parked in reference to. Ms. Ellis?
Thank you, Mayor McFadden and members of council. I think we can certainly work on, I'm not sure if it's a policy. Planning department staff are working on a subdivision approvals process for you. that is schematic. So there's that, so you can see the flow. And I think with that document, we'll identify at those points in time where we need council input and what is considered at what stage. I think some of the things you're talking about today, the subdivision agreement might be too late. Like the subdivision agreement is kind of like the final legal document. So leave it with us, and we may come forward with this schematic in terms of the process with that additional information and see if that gives you what you need, or if we need to go a step farther. But some of the things that you're talking about today are dealt with at pre-consultation. When people come in off the hopper, we identify things like the fiscal impact analysis, a hydro-G study, traffic impact, all of that. So as I said, we will put that together in a schematic for you, and you can have a look, and then we can go from there maybe.
Very good. If we just have some sort of a baseline document to deal with, it's just, we keep capturing them, but having to come back and revisit them for each subdivision and try and remember which stage to put them into, and you've missed the stage or you're too early. 9 times out of 10, we're at the wrong stage for the input that we're providing. But even just a simple one, I know it's standard that at an intersection, when you've got sidewalks that are going to meet up, and you got to cross the road and meet up with the sidewalk on the other side at a T intersection, it's pretty standard that sidewalk will meet up with a little stub of a sidewalk that connects to it. However, in one of the more recent subdivisions, that T intersection, the sidewalk doesn't meet up with a stub, it meets up with somebody's driveway. So then that becomes the method of approaching that sidewalk is up the middle of somebody's driveway. Those are the things that we as a council aren't necessarily going to capture and identify at the appropriate stage. But if it's captured in a fundamental development document for the Township of Cavan Monaghan, it just goes as said that you must capture that at whatever stage it's required. Those are the kind of things that we're building on our experience of development, so that we can learn from our experiences and not have to recapture it every development. And I think, if I understand council, I think that's where we're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of council? Ms. Hurley, what flexibility do you want with the direction on this policy to bring back?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we just need a motion to draft as Karen said, we don't necessarily want to say a policy, but we take a look at what these conditions would be, and we report back to council on that. Very good. And timeline, like January? I don't think so, Mr. Chairman. Set your expectations.
January 1, yeah.
Okay, and that'll come back for council for discussion. So the whole point of this, I think, is for council to be able to open up the discussion and have the conversation on specific items, regardless of what stage of various subdivisions at, so that they can be identified and listened to and incorporated at a staff level into the appropriate documents at the appropriate time. And I think that's where we want to go. So with that, Madam Clerk, how are we with our motion?
So two-part, the beginning to develop the policy to ensure that the developer covers all expenses caused by the developer and incurred by affected residents during new development in the township. And secondly, I have that staff review the structure of the subdivision agreement and investigate options for a policy or an additional document to the subdivision agreement to include timelines and particulars relevant to development.
Very good. I think it all would come back as the same report. And I guess my only concern with that first part about covering all costs, as long as it's consistent with what Mr. Hancock has indicated earlier relative to all the appropriate legislations and requirements.
I can add that in. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Council, okay. Deputy Mayor Graham, mover, seconder. Councilor Moore, sorry, Councilor Deputy Mayor Graham, did you have a question on that? No, all good. Okay, Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, who was the seconder?
We had Councilor Moore.
Thank you. Okay, recorded vote. Councilor Moore.
Yes.
Councilor Huntley.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes.
Councilor Belch.
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Our next item, I can see her smiling face already before us, is with Ms. Ayatt, our report Economic Development 2020-09 Township-Wide Community Improvement Plan. Ms. Ayatt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor McFadden. The report before council is ECD 2020-09. The recommendations that council receive the report for Township-Wide Community Improvement Plan, that council directs staff to prepare an application for funding through the RED program for the purposes of hiring a consultant to expand upon the existing Millbrook CIP, and that council consider allocating $15,000 in the 2021 budget as matching funds for the RED application.
Very good. Any councillors have any questions? I know this has been a priority for several of you. Okay, motion then to receive the report, motion or question?
Question.
Motion. Question. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Graham, or Deputy Mayor Graham.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Just a point of clarification with regards to the recommendations, specifically recommendation number 2. When we had this conversation in the previous meeting, the discussion was with regards to the sort of inclusion, or whether it was an alternating year, or still to be determined CIP throughout the remainder of the township. I just wanted to clarify with regards to the recommendation number 2's explanation of expanding upon the existing Millbrook Community Improvement Plan. My understanding, or my sort of, maybe intention is the word, with regards to this was not sort of an expansion of the existing one, because I think the existing CIP for Millbrook is working quite well, but rather the establishment of a separate one altogether. So I just wanted to clarify exactly what the recommendation means by that expansion upon the existing, versus maybe it's just a vernacular thing, whether it's the intention is not to simply include it within, but rather the establishment of an alternative one altogether. So that's sort of the clarity of what I was looking for.
So through you, Mayor McFadden, to Deputy Mayor Graham. So the expansion on this CIP would be to expand upon the area. So right now, and I think as an attachment to this report, there was, you can see what the area for the CIP is. It's predominantly downtown Millbrook. So if we wanted to be able to offer similar financial incentives, or if we wanted to add additional incentives, we kind of have 2 ways of going about it. If you wanted to add incentives and you wanted to expand to like to other members or other businesses within the township, then you could do a completely different CIP, or you could use your existing CIP and expand upon the area. And expand upon the area would basically allow existing programs, existing eligibility to businesses outside the CIP area. So if you wanted to make modifications as to who is eligible, or changes like that, you can do it as a separate CIP, or you can do it as an expansion on your existing one.
So to be clear, then, just point of clarity, I see Councillor Huntley's there, Mayor McFadden, if you don't see him, just thought I'd bring that up. So the recommendation, just so I'm clear, but so what is captured in the recommendation number 2 is that staff are recommending an expansion of the existing CIP rather than the establishment of a separate CIP. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Councillor Huntley, I see you.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I think part of what we could do with number 2, if you have concerns, Deputy Mayor Graham, is maybe leave it up to the consultant to figure out which is the best path to go. Like maybe there's as we went through the CIP program, we found a number of gotchas we didn't understand or know about, and maybe there's some sort of legislations that are involved. So I would just recommend that, maybe we just modify it to say the best approach via the consultant.
Yeah. Ooh.
Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Sorry, and through you, Mayor, that's exactly what I'm just not in a position at this point to suggest that to approve that recommendation because of exactly that, and Councillor Huntley, that's exactly what I'm looking for. I would like the consultant to let us know the pros and cons to each. And I did, in the report, there's some allusions to it, but at this point, I couldn't vote in favor of that recommendation in number 2. And having been a part of the sort of the catalyst for bringing this forward, that's, you know, I want to, maybe some of my concerns are or could be quelled in the future, but not at this point. So I just, if we can do modification to that second recommendation, that, you know, the hiring of the consultant to review opportunities for either an expansion or the establishment of a new CIP throughout the township, then I would be more than happy to support all of the recommendations. I can't at this point.
Well, that's just great to see everybody getting along. So we've got a recommendation, and it's coming over to the smiling Ms. Ayat to let us know how we're going to move forward now.
No, I just wanted a clarification. So would you, is kind of you're looking for the consultant to tell you whether you should have a CIP that runs in tandem that you could do every other year with your existing CIP, or are you looking to kind of remove the Millbrook CIP?
Sorry, if I can jump in there, I think Ms. Ayat, I think the how it's executed, you know, we left up to us at a later stage. I think what we're looking for is, does it make sense to have one CIP that can cover the entire area, or does it make sense to have two separately managed CIPs? Like how they're executed is not part of the discussion at this point.
Okay.
Is that fair? Deputy Mayor Graham, you're good with that? Okay, well, between the two, you're going to come up with a motion. Who wants to make it? Councillor Huntley?
Can we see the motion again? I think it's just tweaking the words slightly,
Yeah.
just to expand upon existing Millbrook CIP or create a new CIP for the municipality. I think there's just an or statement that needs to be added.
It's gone again, but Deputy Mayor Graham, is that cover what you're trying to capture?
You could do it that way. Sorry, through you, Mayor. You could do it that way, but we could also just simply expand upon the accessibility of community improvement plans in the township, right? Like we don't need to give, I just worry about the limitations of one or the other, but you know, if staff wants that flexibility, that I'm happy to provide it, but I'm also, I can also support it as Councillor Huntley's presented it as well. Either one works for me is what I'm saying.
Either way? Everybody went frozen. I thought it was my screen. Councillor Belch, go ahead.
Through me, yeah, it's not an either or. I don't think that was the intention. That if, you know, we've brought up the issue of that you want to have an improvement program that can go not only in Millbrook, but if it's seen as efficacious, if you will, that we do up ones for the various spots that possibly might be identified through the consultant.
I see Deputy Mayor Graham with his hand up. I believe he's been cultivating us a new motion.
There you go.
Well,
we'll get his hands dirty.
I could try to do that, but I just wondered if staff had any comment with regards to the feedback on the previous compromise that I tried to float. In response to Councillor Huntley, I'm looking to staff to sort of say if that's a freedom that they would like, or we could present it as either or. You know,
could I just ask, just for clarification, what would the concern be with having it as one that you can turn off and on programs as you have budget or as you see priorities arise?
I'm thinking one of the things might be, and I'm certainly no consultant on the topic, but you may wish to have two separate ones because there may be a priority either outside of the downtown or in the downtown that you want to direct specific funds to in a particular year, i.e. if we're dealing with a back alleyway and we have significant funds that we want to dedicate to a specific project in order to try and make that happen, versus if you make them available to the entire township in that year, you may not be able to do the actual job that you're trying to do. I don't know, it's just devil's advocate why you might want two versus one, but there could be the same argument why you want one and just to set them out to split up. Deputy Mayor Graham?
Yeah, and through you, Mayor, one consideration is when we talked about the alternate year opportunity is that rather than dilute the pool, you alternate years so that the full freight is allowed to make the impact to the different, different groups. Right? Your 25,000 is available in the full year for the area outside, and inside. But there could also be structural considerations for the review of those applications, for example, from a rural standpoint versus the existing mill road. I mean, there's a myriad of different things that could be changed and structured. And the idea or the intention was never to dilute or take away from the existing benefit as it's outlined in the report, that the municipality has benefited from the investment through the milling CIP. So, it was more to piggyback on success rather than enhance it and dilute the potential impact.
Sure.
Go ahead, Ms. Hyatt.
So you can actually, sorry, through you, Mayor McFadden, to members of council, losing my manners here. Must be getting close to Christmas.
No, we're used to it.
Yeah. Thanks. So you could possibly, and this could be, as Councillor Huntley had suggested, this is what we could possibly get the consultant to look at. But I think what you can do is you could have maybe a series of maps rather than just one. So you could identify a program based on which map you are wanting to focus on for that particular year. But again, that could be addressed through the consultant's recommendations.
Councillor Huntley.
Through you, Mayor, I think we're kind of confusing the execution and the tool here. Like, I think the CIP is the tool that allows you to execute. And I think the question is, can we do and have the flexibility that we're all asking for with one tool, or do we need separate tools? And I think that's the question that goes back to the consultant.
Yeah. All right, so we got a motion from Councillor Huntley to define our toolbox.
So
Deputy Mayor Graham.
So then I'll to make a recommendation then. So I'm okay with 1 and 3 as they exist. And then the adjustment to recommendation 2, if we want some flexibility rather than an either or scenario, would be the council directs staff to prepare an application for funding through the Rural Economic Development Program for the purposes of hiring a consultant to explore opportunity to expand upon the existing CIP plan within the township.
Does that work, Councillor Huntley?
It's fine by me.
Perfect. We got a mover of Deputy Mayor Graham and a seconder of Councillor Huntley. Madam Clerk, you're all good on the motion?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Recorded vote.
Councillor Belch.
Yes.
Councillor Huntley.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham.
Yes.
Councillor Moore.
Oh, you're turned off. There you go.
Okay, now, yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Well done, Ms. Hyatt. Thank you. Merry Christmas. Next up, we have Report Fire 2020-03 Master Fire Plan, Chief Belfour.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. The Fire Department report today in front of Council is in regards to the Master Fire Plan, and the recommendation is that Council approves the Master Fire Plan and Community Risk Assessment completed by Emergency Management and Training, Inc. During the presentation of the Master Fire Plan to Council by Emergency Management Training and Inc. on December 7th, there was some discussion surrounding some of the recommendation. I just wanted to note today that each of the strategic recommendations would require approval from the budgeting process along with a final report to Council for approval before implementation, with options for Council's consideration at those times. I'm here today. If there's any questions regarding this plan, I'll be happy to answer them.
Very good. Questions from members of Council? Councillor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, to Chief. So, sorry, what you were just saying then is by accepting the Master Fire Plan, we aren't necessarily accepting all the recommendations within the Master Fire Plan. We're just acknowledging that there are recommendations within the Master Fire Plan. Through the Mayor to Councillor Huntley, that's correct. The plan is there's a number of recommendations. These are issues that are facing the fire service, and each one of these issues is going to require a report back to Council, because at some point the fire service and Council along with the community are going to have to
to address these issues. And as we move forward, and again, this plan is a 10-year plan, and it's sort of to focus the fire department's efforts. I think, I don't want to speak for council, but if you look at recommendation number 1, we've been talking as a group between council and the fire department in regards to the fire station. That's recommendation number 1. That's, what is the most pressing issue for the fire service, and then they go down from there, if that answers your question. But there will be options provided by staff regarding those recommendations within the plans. Here's the issue. Here are some options for council to consider. And I know it's important. It's important to the fire service and myself. Are they fiscally responsible? We have option A, option B, and option C.
Very good. Further questions? No motions to have shovels in the ground tomorrow. Councillor Huntley.
Darn it.
All right. I'll make the motion to move the report.
Very good. Second, we got Councillor Moore. Any further discussion? Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Thank you very much, Chief. I know there was a lot of work that went into that, and thank you. Next item, 10.8, Report Public Works 2020-25, Fill Bylaw Transfer of Funds. Mr. Hancock?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a little problem with my clicker. Not sure what, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation for you and council is that council approve the annual transfer of revenues received through the fees and charges site alteration, account number 0149609199, into the Fill Management Reserve for future use towards infrastructure improvements. And just as a bit of background, this monies has been coming in through our fill bylaw and through site alteration permits. And we've accumulated, I think in the financial, it says just over $26,000. And this transfer would allow us to use it back towards the road infrastructure and capital projects. So that's our intent. And that's the discussions at senior staff level.
Very good. So correct me if I'm wrong, right now, this money's coming into the bylaw department?
It comes into the bylaw department. That has in fact partly been taken over by engineering staff through some of the site alterations, such as the temple project, etc. So some of the funds are being collected more so by engineering than by bylaw, but doesn't mean that there's a separation. It still means that both can do the fill permits and collect. The intent is that the funds be transferred so that we have access to them for road projects where we believe the work is required due to the trucking operations.
Very good. Excellent. So the money is coming out of bylaw department. Mr. Phillips, who's on holidays, and you brought the report before us. Well executed. Well done. Any questions from other members of council?
It was with his suggestion, by the way.
Through you, Mayor.
All right. Go ahead, Councillor Belch.
Just a question to Mr. Hancock. What would be your percentage split on how much of the money collected would have been from the temple?
Presently, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Belch, there's approximately just over $20,000 came from the temple. They have been trying to fill in the large pit area on that site, so they are required under the fill bylaw to pay us, and they have done so to date. So the largest amount has come from them, but we have some from other projects where other properties are moving to other private sites within the township. So the majority has come from that site.
Thanks.
Can I get a motion then to receive the report and accept the recommendation? Very good. Deputy Mayor Graham and Councillor
Tim Belch.
Moore. Oh, Councillor. Okay, Councillor Belch. I'll give him the benefit because I don't see him. Okay, Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is passed. All right, our next item is Report Public Works 2020-26 for rehabilitation work, well number 1 municipal water supply. Mr. Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to council, recommendation number 1 is that council approve emergency rehabilitation works on well number 1 at the municipal well site on King Street from Odour Water Technical Services from Paris, Ontario, in the amount of $21,500 plus net HST in the amount of $378.40 for a total of $21,878.40. And number 2 recommendation that funds be utilized from the 2020 water wastewater operating budget. Can't read the full number, but 03483, etc., 40100. And that are the recommendations before you. I should again just mention that we have had some pressure and pumping capabilities at pump number 1. A lot of water is on site today, and we have basically been communicating. It appears that it's an issue related to the screen, so they are doing some pressure cleaning on the screens at the bottom of the well. And this is one of three wells and 3 pumps that we have in this system. So this is a maintenance item, but it was a higher cost because we have to go down into the well, pull the pump, and we're doing a high pressure wash on the screens. Appears that may be successful, but only time will tell.
Very good. Questions from members of council? None. Motion to receive the report and accept the recommendation. Councillor Moore, Deputy Mayor Graham. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Our next item is Report Corporate Services 2020-23 Off-Road Vehicles in the Cavan Ward. Ms. Arthurs.
The recommendation is that council review and adopt bylaw number 2020-78, being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 2020-62, being a bylaw to regulate the operation of off-road vehicles in the Millbrook and North Monaghan ward within the jurisdiction of the Township of Cavan Monaghan. And this would allow for the inclusion of prohibiting ORVs in the Cavan ward.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Arthurs. And I will add, this has been part of what we have been discussing as a council to move forward to ensure that we retain status quo effective January 1st. So there is no surprises in the report before us. I would suggest, though, in addition to that motion, just so we're all clear, in addition to the motion, my suggestion would be add on that staff be directed to summarize the comments from the November 30th public meeting and the submissions received during the commenting period, and to bring back a report to council in 2021 to discuss the future use of ORVs in the Cavan ward, if council would be so accommodating. I got a mover. Deputy Mayor
Tim.
Graham, seconder, Councillor Belch. Is that what I heard?
Yep.
Very good. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Thank you, Council. Next item is Report CAO 2020-11, response to Mayor Therrien's letter dated November 6, 2020. Ms. Hurley.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The recommendation is before you that council directs staff to draft a letter in response to Mayor Therrien's letter of November 6, 2020, and to be forwarded on to the City of Peterborough.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Hurley. I might suggest in addition to that, to provide a little more direction on that recommendation, that staff responds specifically to the statements in the letter pertaining to servicing and to assessment to provide clarity. If council would be so accommodating.
Tim would make that.
Very good.
Motion.
Okay, motion for that. Madam Clerk, you're okay? It's the motion plus the addition of the second part.
Yes, sir.
Very good. A seconder, Councillor Huntley. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Deputy Mayor
Comment.
Graham,
Sorry, discussion.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Huntley. Go ahead.
through you, Mayor. Is it when it says the City of Peterborough, what is that specifically referring to? Like, is it like the CAO? Is it the city council? Like, who is the city of Peterborough?
So through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Huntley, the letter came from Mayor Therrien's letter came from her directly. So I would assume that we would write the letter back to her. My suggestion is, in the context of the letter, she does mention the city council. So I would
CC?
suggest that you draft the letter back to Mayor Therrien, but you council or CC the city councilors.
Very good.
Good
And
idea.
also you would CC everybody else that was CC'd on the original email, i.e. the ministers and the appropriate.
Absolutely.
MPs.
Absolutely.
Yep. Very good. Good question, Councillor Huntley.
Thanks for the clarification.
You're
Madam
welcome.
Clerk, recorded vote.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Next item, report CEO 2020 report and capital project status. Ms. Hurley?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I don't have anything to add unless council has any clarification or questions.
Very good. Maybe you can give us an update on the 1 o'clock announcement from Doug Ford that you weren't able to see today that's going to affect the rest of your week.
I cannot give you an update on that right now. However, I did receive a document, and once we are finished today, I'll be happy to go through that document and see
Very
how
good.
that.
Come on.
We all appreciate that. This is the week before
Give us
Christmas. It's a significant change, and it does affect a lot within the municipality, and a lot just got dropped on Ms. Hurley's plate as well as staff. So in all seriousness, we do appreciate it. That is a lot, and there's significant changes coming about over the course of the next 28 days starting on December 26th. So thank you. It doesn't go unnoticed, and we all appreciate that. So thank you, Ms. Hurley.
Give us a Karnak moment.
Any questions for Ms. Hurley specific to the CAO report and capital project status? Councillor Huntley.
Through you, Chair. I think maybe an addition to the list would be this planning schematic that we were talking about earlier.
Right.
Tracked here.
Yep. Ms. Hurley, you were going to add that anyways?
We automatically, the clerk and I go through the items that council has directed us through every council meeting, and we add them to the list as it is. So that will definitely be added, sir.
Very good. Excellent. Anything further from members of council? If not, a motion then to receive that verbal report. Deputy Mayor Graham, Councillor Moore, Madam Clerk, all the recorded vote.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. Council committee verbal reports. Deputy Mayor Graham.
Nothing to report at this time. But
Councillor Huntley. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
This last thing was just nothing to report. Please exercise caution. I know with COVID and the pending lockdown that people are going to be using the trails, but they are susceptible to wintering conditions. We've already seen that 20-degree plus variability in. So just be wary some and take the appropriate precautions when utilizing the trails over the holidays.
Very good. And I know it's not a township committee, but appreciation, Deputy Mayor Graham, to your involvement in the Peterborough Public Health Board. It's certainly been a pretty busy and active board for this term of council. So thank you very much for your representation on that. It's very much appreciated, and it's certainly become quite the committee to be sitting on. So thank you. Councillor Huntley.
Nothing at this time.
Councillor Moore.
Nothing at this time.
And Councillor Belch.
And nothing at this time, but just to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas, and we'll see you in the new year.
Absolutely. Well said, Councillor Belch. Good way to finish off those council committee verbal reports. Merry Christmas, everybody. Can I get a motion then to receive those verbal reports? Deputy Mayor Graham and Councillor Huntley. Madam Clerk, record a vote.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. There's no general business, no correspondence for information, no correspondence for action, so we will move right into our bylaws. Madam Clerk, before I start, is there any changes to any of those bylaws as a result of today's meeting? I do not believe so.
No, sir.
Very good. Okay. Can I get a motion then for the bylaw number 2020-75 being a bylaw to temporarily exempt certain lands with registered plan 40M 45M 256 for the Township of Cabmonaghan from part lot control, and bylaw number 2020-76 being a bylaw to authorize the execution of a subdivision agreement between Veltri and Son Limited and the Corporation of the Township of Cabmonaghan, and bylaw number 2020-77 being a bylaw to impose and consolidate user fees and charges, and bylaw number 2020-78 being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 2020-62 being a bylaw to regulate ORVs in the Township of Cabmonaghan. Be read a first, second, third time, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached thereto. Moved by Deputy Mayor Graham, seconded by Councillor Moore. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. There is no unfinished business. Any notices of motion? Or even just a suggestion for the rest of staff to enjoy the holiday season despite everything else that's going on around us. But please take the time off to recharge those batteries, and we'll be back at it in January. Confirming bylaw being bylaw number 2020-79 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the meeting held December 21st, 2020. Be read a first, second, third time, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached thereto. Moved by Councillor Huntley and Councillor Belch. Madam Clerk,
Sounds
recorded
good.
vote.
Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, motion is approved. I got a motion to adjourn. We got Councillor Huntley and Councillor Belch. Madam Clerk, recorded vote.
Councillor Moore,
Yes.
Councillor Huntley,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Moore, Councillor Belch,
Yes.
Mayor McFadden.
Yes, I thought that was interesting. I thought maybe that was going to be a weighted vote there with Councillor Moore getting 2 votes on the adjournment. Well done, Councillor Moore. I don't know how you pulled that off, but well done. All right, everybody. I wish you all the best over the holiday season and all the best in 2021. And stay safe, stay healthy. Thanks, everybody.
Right
Merry
back
Christmas.
at you.
Take care.